Emergencies like unexpected health issues, a car breaking down, or losing a job are inevitable in life. We can try to avoid them by trying to live a healthy lifestyle, taking great care of our car, or doing our best at work, but they might still happen anyway. Let's imagine you're in one of those very unlucky months where your car breaks down, the next week you need to replace your water heater, and then the next week you get a root canal and it's not covered by your insurance. I know this example is purposefully extreme, but sometimes that's just how life is. And it would amount to an estimate of $3,000 that you would need during this crazy month to be able to handle all of those extra payments. And if you have an emergency fund, then great, you can use it. The problem is what happens if you don't have money saved. You could potentially ask your friends and family for help, but if you cannot, then you might have to use credit card debt, which have very high interest rate, or even payday loans, which have insane interest rates. We have an example of credit card debt at 20% interest rate with a repayment of $100 a month. It would take you 3.5 years to repay everything, and you would also have to pay interest of $1,200. So in total, that would cost you $4,200 instead of $3,000. And that's why building an emergency fund to have money ready for those potential scenarios is so important. It gives you the peace of mind to know that when the emergency happens, you will be financially ready, and those extra payments won't hurt your financial stability, won't put you in years of debt, and won't hurt your credit score. And before we talk about how much you should save for your emergency fund, let's look at where you should store it first. You want your emergency fund to not lose value over time. That takes out the stock market, as the value could drop anytime. That also takes out the cash that you could save at home, because with the prices going up with inflation, your cash stays at the same value and therefore loses its buying power over time. Your emergency fund also needs to be very easy to access. That takes out any savings account that require you to lock the money for a certain period of time. And lastly, you need your emergency fund to make some money for you over time, to earn some interest. And that takes out a regular savings account that usually has around 0.4% interest, when a high yield savings account is more around 3 to 5%, if not more. So the winner is definitely the high yield savings account, and it's where it would be preferable for you to store your emergency fund. Now that we've seen where to store the emergency fund, let's see how much you should aim to save to feel confident. There is no one generic amount like $1,000 or $50,000 that everyone should save for the emergency fund. Your goal should align with your situation. The rule of thumb is to save 3 to 6 months of expenses, and that makes sense because one of the emergency could be losing your job, and you would need several months to find a new one, and therefore cover several months of expenses without a salary. So for example, if your monthly bills are $1,500, your variable expenses are $500, and your monthly debt payments are $500, then 1 month of expenses would be $2,500. 3 months of expenses would be $7,500, and 6 months would be $15,000. And if your first thought is, that's too much, I can't save 6 months of expenses right now, this is crazy, that would be a very normal reaction, especially if you're living paycheck to paycheck or if you have some debt to repay. And that's why your first goal should be much smaller, like $50, $500, $1,000. And that will already potentially be enough to cover some small emergencies. I have created a visual tracker in Google Sheets. It's free, link in the description. And it can help you stay motivated to contribute to your emergency fund, especially when the goal seems so out of reach. In the data input tab, you can write down every time you contribute to your emergency fund by writing a date, the description, and an amount. You can also change your currency on the top right if you need. And then you have 3 different tabs for 3 different types of goals. I would recommend that you start with the tab named Custom. You simply enter your goal in this cell, for example, $1,000, and you will see where you stand compared to your goal. Why I like this type of representation is because even a small amount like $50 will add some extra squares. And I think it really cements the idea that even a small contribution helps to build the whole fund. Then you have a tab for 3 months of expenses goal. You simply write what 1 month of expenses represent for you in this cell, and then you'll see how much you have to save in total and how much you've already saved. And this time, the visual representation is divided into 3 months. And then the last tab is the same, but for 6 months of expenses. So if you decide to use this, you have to make sure that you are logged into your Google account, and then you need to click on File, then make a copy to get your own version saved in your Google account. If you would prefer a paper version of a visual tracker, you can simply Google emergency fund printable tracker, and there's a lot of them on the internet, and you can also draw one yourself. Now that we've seen how to stay motivated, let's see how to actually contribute to the emergency fund, especially if you feel like you don't have much to spare. In order to save money, you can either increase your income or decrease your expenses. For increasing your income, make a list of everything that comes to mind that would be feasible for you to bring you money, and don't hesitate to Google it to get as much ideas as possible. For example, it could be selling one of your skills or selling some things on Vinted or any website like that. It could be driving people or delivery, dog sitting, babysitting, an online business, YouTube, social media, online teaching, private tutoring, and so on. Now, to decide which one would be the best for you, let's make a graph or matrix. Draw 2 axes on your paper. The first axis will be the effort. High effort on top, low effort on bottom. Effort means, will it be tiring to do so? Will it take a lot of time? Do you need equipment? Do you need training? And so on. And the second axis will be how much income this side hustle could potentially bring you. Low income on the left, high income on the right, and this is quite self-explanatory. And now you can place your side hustle ideas in the matrix according to each criteria. For example, for me, dog sitting would be rather low effort as I love dogs and I work from home, and mid income. But an online business would be high effort, but also would potentially bring high income. Anything you put in the rectangle, low effort, high income, is just do it. What are you waiting for? This is great ideas. Anything you put in the rectangle, high effort, high income, I think you should consider them thoroughly, as they will take a lot of motivation and time, and they could make life hell if you don't enjoy it. And we don't want that. In the rectangle, low effort, low income, those are more like extras that you could consider in the future, but you should definitely not focus too much on them. And in the rectangle, high effort, low income, just don't even think about it. Those ones are bad. So in my example, I would choose dog sitting as I love dogs and I work from home. And that would mean an estimate of around $300 per month. I would recommend that you check testimonials online to see what estimate of income you could give for the side hustle in your own country. As we've seen before, the other way to save more money is to decrease your expenses. So let's make a list of all of our bills and expenses and the amount you pay each month for them. You can log into your bank account or credit card statement to kind of remember how much you spent. And then create an extra column called new amount. Are there any expenses in this list that you could decrease or scrap altogether? If so, write the new amount in the new amount column. And make sure to not restrict yourself too much, as we want this new budget to be sustainable. In my example, I am changing phone and internet providers to cheaper options. I'm taking out some subscriptions that I've forgotten about, and I'm reducing some budgets while keeping in mind that I still want to enjoy life. And now, if you subscribe the new amounts total from the previous amount total, you will get how much you can save for your emergency fund by decreasing your expenses. If we add the income increase and the expenses decrease, we get $445 that we can save for our emergency fund. In this example, you would reach your $1,000 savings goal in 3 months, and you would reach your 3 months of expenses goal in 1 year and 5 months. And it might even happen faster if you get better at your side hustle or if you get a raise at work. And the last point I want to answer is if you have debt. Should you focus on paying back your debt first, or should you focus on saving for your emergency fund first? To answer this question, let's look at each scenario concretely. If you only focus on paying back debt and an emergency happens and you don't have an emergency fund, then you will need to incur as much debt as needed for this new emergency. And you might end up at the place where you started with your debt, or even worse. If you focus on your emergency fund first while still paying your minimum payment for your debt, of course, and an emergency happens, then you have some money saved to lower the amount of debt that you will have to take on, which means lowering the interest that you will have to pay extra. And you might even have enough money saved at that time to handle the emergency fund without debt. A good middle ground could be to adapt your strategy to the amount of emergency fund you have. For example, you could start by focusing on your emergency fund until you reach $1,000, and that will help you with small emergencies. And then after that, you could at the same time focus on, for example, your most critical debt, the one with the highest interest, and also on your emergency fund. You could do 50%, 50%, or any percentage of your choice. And then when you reach an acceptable amount of emergency fund, for example, it could be 3 months of expenses, you can then fully focus on your debt with much less attention to your emergency fund. Now, if you're looking for concrete action steps that you can take right now to start your journey of building an emergency fund, you could first set up the best place to store your emergency fund. Then you could decide on short-term and long-term goals. Then find a way to stay motivated to contribute, create a strategy to save more money, and then you could think of an adaptable plan for your debt situation. And finally, I think you should give yourself a reward for doing all of these action steps. For me, it would be bothering my husband for a few minutes and eating a chocolate ganache. My next video will be about creating the simplest budget spreadsheet in Google Sheets for complete beginners. So if you're interested, subscribe and have a nice day. Bye.